this is our celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Fletcher Forum of World Affairs, a publication that has been amplifying Fletcher voices and global perspectives for half a century. And now, to open the program, I want to really just acknowledge our Sophie Lerenbaum. She's the editor-in-chief of the Fletcher Forum. She's also graduating this year with a MAL degree. And not only that, but she's also a double jumbo. She graduated from Tufts in 2018 with a degree in international relations and environmental studies. So please join me in welcoming Sophie.
Good evening, Fletcher community, alumni, faculty, friends, and honored guests. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all back to the Hill tonight to mark this momentous occasion, the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Fletcher Forum of World Affairs. Tonight, we gather not only to mark a milestone, but to honor a living legacy, one that has shaped the way we think, speak, and act in a complex world of international affairs. We are deeply honored to be joined this evening by three individuals whose careers have helped define the very values that the Forum holds dear. Patrick Reed, class of 78 and 94, Kent Jones, class of 79, and Professor Bill Moomaw, Professor Emeritus of International Environmental Policy. Your presence here is a tribute to the enduring power of scholarship, mentorship, and intellectual rigor that the Forum embodies. Such a milestone birthday caused the Forum team to reflect upon where we started, where we are as a publication, and where we are going. When the Forum was founded in 1975, and as it published its first edition the following year, the world was undergoing seismic shifts. Since then, we've continued to see dramatic changes to the world around us. Yet, for all of this transformation, some truths have remained stubbornly persistent. Wars rage on, genocide still exists, democracy is fragile, inequity and injustice endure. And so, in publishing this 50th anniversary edition of the Forum, we wanted readers and authors alike to ask themselves, how much has the world really changed over these last 5 decades? And more importantly, what must we do differently? The Fletcher Forum has challenged generations of students, scholars, practitioners, and others to answer this very question. From the likes of Madeleine Albright to Kofi Annan to emerging student voices, the Forum has served as a crucible for debate, a public square for discourse, and a vehicle for truth-telling. For 5 decades, it has created a space not only for thought leadership, but for thoughtful dissent and visionary disruption. As we look back on 50 years of provocative essays, prescient commentary, and tireless inquiry, we also look forward. In celebration of this anniversary, the Forum has invited 20 past contributors to revisit their original works, to test their theories against the tide of history, to see what has withstood and what has unraveled, and to imagine what the next 50 years might hold. It's a humbling exercise, but it's a hopeful one. Tonight, as we reconnect the past and recommit to the future, let us celebrate not only what the Forum has achieved, but what it still aspires to be. A place where academics and students alike can tackle the hardest questions. To the editors, writers, and visionaries who have stewarded the Forum across 5 decades, and to the staff and the executive team, past and present, who have worked hard to produce thoughtful and thought-provoking content, thank you. And of course, to our matchless managing editor, Sri Devi Nair, who's right here. It's been, your work in this edition has been nothing short of extraordinary, and we would not be here without you. It's been an honor to serve at the helm of the Forum during this 50th anniversary year, and I am certain that in the next 50 years, the Fletcher Forum will continue to meet the moment with fearless thought leadership and unapologetic inquiry. Now, I'd like to turn your attention to the screen to hear a message from Dr. Jeff Sheehan, one of the founding members of the Fletcher Forum and its first director. After completing his degree at the Fletcher, Mr. Sheehan went on to serve as the Associate Dean of International Relations at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania for 30 years and authored several books during that time. Mr. Sheehan is also recipient of the Silver Magnolia Award from the Municipal Government of Shanghai, though I have no doubt that the magnum opus of his career was founding the Fletcher Forum of World Affairs. Without further ado, here are the words he wanted to share with us all tonight.
My name is Jeff Sheehan. I am Fletcher 76 and Fletcher 77. My first course at the Fletcher School was called The Role of Force in International Politics. It was taught by the legendary Professor Jeff Kemp. After the first class, I went to the bookstore to buy some books and other materials that were related to the course. And I was very excited because I had decided to come to Fletcher because I was an idealist and I wanted to make the world more peaceful and prosperous through law and diplomacy. But when I got to the bookstore, I realized that the first thing I had to buy was a bomb damage calculator. And the bomb damage calculator was kind of a circular slide rule, which would allow the students to calculate how many people would die in Medford and how many windows would be broken in Provincetown if the Soviet Union dropped a bomb on Boston. And as I walked back to my apartment with my bomb damage calculator, I was wondering what happened to the law and the diplomacy. And that was my initiation into the realism of international politics and international relations. And I got over my initial horror and decided to stay. Two of the people that I met that first day in Medford were a guy named Fred Smith and a guy named Shashi Tharoor. And they both became my good friends. Fred was a kind of a button-down Reagan conservative. To my, you can't tell now, but I was pretty hairy and I had a beard. And I was kind of somewhere in between a Keddy socialist and a Bernie Sanders populist. And so Fred and I took a little while to become friends, but we eventually became very close friends. Shashi was very interesting. He's from India. He was only 19. He was just a kid. He was still a teenager, but he was much smarter than anybody else. And so we kind of got attracted to him. I remember one very spirited conversation we had with Shashi in which he was defending India's acquisition of nuclear weapons, which had taken place in 1974. And we challenged him on that. And his rebuttal was, and I found this rather disingenuous of him, his rebuttal was, well, we don't have a delivery mechanism. What's the big deal? That still strikes me, even till today, as rather odd. But anyway, we all became great friends. And part of the outcome of that friendship was something called the Fletcher Forum. And by default, I became what we call the director. We didn't have an editor-in-chief. Shashi became the chairman of the editorial board, and Fred became the chairman of the publications committee. It was quite a tangle of euphemisms to avoid anybody being editor-in-chief. I think it was kind of a consequence of it being the People's Republic of Fletcher at that time. In any case, that was the birth of the Fletcher Forum. And as I thought about it, it's now 50 years later. 50 years, my gosh, that's a long time. And I guess my reaction, my feeling about that is that there could hardly be anything more satisfying to the creator of an organization, a journal, a business, a marriage, anything that's created, if it still exists 50 years later, that's enormously rewarding. And all I can say is to all those who followed me as I know that you now have an editor-in-chief and you've stowed the title director, but all those who have been leaders ever since in those 50 years, I'd just like to say thank you. And to those who will come in the next 50 years, I say, um, uh, keep up the good work. It's a wonderful journal and produces important ideas and provides a great forum for discussion. And I couldn't be happier to have this chance to give you my greetings, my salutations, and my thanks, and my best wishes for the future of this great forum.
So without further ado, I will invite up my friend and colleague, Alex Wolf.
Hello, welcome. There we go. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Alex Wolf. I'm the managing podcast editor of the forum, second-year Mauld student here at Fletcher. And we are joined, to my right, by three of our authors from the journal, which you can see and grab a copy of here. All three of our panelists today, they are also longtime members of the Fletcher community, and they wrote pieces for our 50th anniversary edition, reflecting on their previous contributions to the forum. So they're members of the Fletcher community either as graduates, professors, or both. And I'll briefly introduce all three. So I'll start with Professor Kent Jones, class of 1979, Professor Emeritus of Economics at Babson College, and a former visiting professor here at Fletcher. Professor Jones revisited his 1992 piece surveying the structure of trade policy. We're also joined by William Moomaw, Professor Emeritus of International Environmental Policy and the founder of CERP, Fletcher's Center for International Environment and Resource Policy. Professor Moomaw re-examined his 1990 piece on global policy responses to climate change. And lastly, we're joined by Professor Patrick Reed, class of 1978 and 94, I believe. An international trade lawyer with Simmons and Wiskin, and an adjunct professor at both St. John's University School of Law and Baruch College, City University of New York. Professor Reed's sequel to his 1978 piece, I believe the second or third edition of the forum, second edition. So we're going all the way back today. So his sequel to his 1978 piece analyzing the efforts by the American steel industry to encourage protective tariffs on imported steel offers insight into how deeply those protective tariffs are built into the American steel economy. So we're excited to expand on these pieces, given their timelessness, their centrality to the history of the forum, and Fletcher as institutions grounded in interdisciplinary study and thought. So, gentlemen, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today. Before we get to the meat and potatoes of the pieces, I actually would like to ask you first, Professor Reed. I'm compelled to ask about your experience writing for the second edition of the forum as a student author. So can you just elaborate on the editing process, the writing process? What was it like committing to your classmates to deliver this piece?
Sure. Let me see if I can, what do I do?
There we go.
Turn that on. Okay. And so first I see Professor Alan Henriksen in the audience, and he was the faculty advisor of Fletcher Forum. And I should say that he published a short commentary about how to think like a historian, which happened to appear immediately on the page after my commentary in the second issue. In terms of the immediate editing, I don't remember very much, except I can say that it was relatively informal, and my commentary was edited by David Kennedy. And I knew him. I knew he was a very smart student. I didn't know how smart he was because he, after graduating from Fletcher and Harvard Law School, he immediately joined the faculty of Harvard Law School, where he is still a professor. But he, my article was, it's sort of an offshoot of my Mauld thesis. And I put together some thoughts about specifically the anti-dumping law and anti-dumping policy, and handed it in. And a few weeks later, David came to me and said, well, we need to change this from something that says in each paragraph, another interesting fact is such and such, and turn it into something that actually supports and advances a particular thesis. And so that is what I remember from my editorial experience, or the experience as the editee. And at the time, we did not have a policy of acknowledging assistance in writing the commentary, so I think it is appropriate for me to thank David for his suggestions and his significant improvement in my article at this point.
I'll turn as well to Professor Jones. If you could elaborate on your experience working with the forum in, it would have been 1992.
Yes, well, that was actually some years after I had finished my Fletcher degree. I had also been at the State Department working on steel policy. This is why I read Patrick's article with interest even now. I really don't have too much of a memory, frankly, from 1992 when that came out, except that I was up for promotion and that was a good addition. And by the way, I commend the team at Fletcher Forum. Are our articles actually in that issue? This is amazing. I mean, we finished, when did we finish our edits? Two or 3 weeks ago. And I can only say that if all journals had that sort of speed and commitment to bringing the articles out, many professors' tenure reviews would have been much more pleasant than they were when you hung on every mail that came in, or email that came in about your article actually getting published. Here we have it in 2 weeks. So thank you for that. I have to say also, since I don't have too much of a memory from 1992, the team, I thought, did an excellent job. They were very thorough in reviewing my piece, and they also, we went back and forth on several revisions. The only problem was I wrote a piece that dealt strongly with the tariff issue, and I started this before things changed. So it was like in April when I had finished the first draft of this, and I sent it in, and then it came back and said, well, Professor Jones, maybe you should take a look at what happened this past week in the news, right? Then we go through another review, and then 2 weeks later, there would be another bombshell in the news, and that would also alter my article. So the forum has the advantage of having a team, people who are on top of all this, and can work together and then craft really timely additions to the articles that they publish. So that's my strongest impression of it, is how thorough they were, and how much my piece now, just this couple weeks, of course it's ancient history, right? Given what's happened with the UK deal and the China deal. But very positive.
Let me cut in for just a second and second what Kent said about the quality of the editing from this team. It was much more rigorous and much more thorough. And I think David Kennedy did not look at my footnotes at all. But the current team went over them in great detail. And I think my current piece has 47 footnotes. I think the 1978 one had something like 12 footnotes. And so it is much sort of higher quality scholarship.
And I'll turn to Professor Moomaw as well, as I know you may have had a bit more intimate experience with the forum, having been at Fletcher for so long. So maybe if you could elaborate on your experience as well.
Well, I actually wrote my first article in 1990 while I had just come to Tufts, but I was not at Fletcher. My background's a little bit different from most people here in that I have a PhD in physical chemistry, and I had been moving away from my lab research to the science behind what was happening with the environment, and began teaching sort of fortuitously the first science course in an environment in the spring of 1970 that I had no idea was going to be the first Earth Day, and was a little startled when I walked into the class and there were 85 students sitting there, eager to learn about the environment. And I began. I had another opportunity to spend a year with the U.S. Senate, where the issue was stratospheric ozone depletion, and that was just the kind of chemistry I did. So I was the technical staff person for that, and worked on other issues as well. The whole set of energy issues, which was great. The climate was so new as an issue. I became the first director of the climate program at the World Resources Institute and left that to come to Tufts. And I was asked to give an all-university presentation, which I did. And Fletcher students, being Fletcher students, said, we only have one international environment course on global oil markets. Well, you know, there'd been the oil shocks and all that kind of stuff. That made sense. We want more. And the faculty buckled under the pressure, and they advertised for somebody to teach a concentration of 4 courses in international environment. And everybody said, oh, you want to apply for that? And I said, well, I don't think they have room for a physical chemist at the Fletcher School. I mean, I've lived abroad, I've worked internationally and so on, but, you know, I'm not all that well versed in, you know, the academic side of international relations. Well, to my amazement, I did apply and I did get the job. And it was wonderful, I must say. The interaction with Fletcher students was just, for me, an extraordinary life experience through the whole 24 years that I taught here. And during that time, I wrote a couple of articles for the Forum. And every time I found the student editors to be extremely helpful, extremely engaged. I don't know whether they were faking this or not, but they seemed extremely interested. It was great. I was delighted with that. And to me, the most amazing thing is that the Forum staff who worked on this 50th edition are, I think, actually going to graduate, which I wasn't sure was going to happen given the amount of time they were spending on this issue, which was phenomenal. They look a little bleary-eyed, but other than that, you look in pretty good shape. But you were extraordinarily helpful. My first draft, it didn't stay on the topic all that well, I guess, and you were kind enough to point that out to me, and so I went back and tried again, and it was very, very helpful as things went on, and you had really good suggestions. So I want to thank you for that.
So to all the future PhDs out there, I want to make sure everyone's paying attention. This is a great place to get published. I hope we were recording this wonderful advertisement, so thank you for that. And Professor Moomaw, I'd actually like to stay with you for our first question. In your piece, you highlighted how climate science has influenced climate diplomacy, leading to the creation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the current international climate regime as we know it. In the 30 years following the initial Conference of the Parties, that's COP, we are still falling short of meeting agreed upon targets despite increasing alignment between the policy and the scientific communities. So my question for you, and this being Fletcher, it's a double question. Is the current international system for climate diplomacy outdated? And what might a new or a more effective tool or philosophy for climate diplomacy be?
Well, those are both very good. Those are good questions. Just as background, the paper was really about the remarkable way in which this invention, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was formed in order to inform governments and negotiations about climate change. I don't think there's any other system that has had this kind of relationship between expertise and diplomacy. And the first, it was formed in 1988. I actually attended the first meeting, not as a member of the IPCC, because I was director of the climate program at WRI. And it was the very first thing in the George Bush, the first administration. It was held at the State Department, and Secretary Baker, that was his first official act, was to host that meeting. So this had high-level support. And remember, President Bush had just come out as vice president under Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan actually agreed that we should agree to moving ahead on addressing ozone depletion, and climate change was the next issue. So it seems a little surprising to many people that that's how that all got started. That report came out in 1990, and in 1992, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was unanimously agreed to at Rio, at the famous Rio Earth Summit. Two other treaties at the same time were the Desertification Treaty and the Convention on Biological Diversity. To have 150, I think it was 6 heads of state and government in one place, it was a great opportunity to get signatures. It's a whole lot easier to get them all there than to chase them around the world and get them to get enough signatures and then enough ratifications. The US was the 5th nation to ratify, and the first large nation. And so the meeting was in, I think, February, and or rather was in June, and we ratified in September. I mean, that's, in diplomacy, that's lightning. You know, that's just beyond belief. And by February, the required 60 governments had ratified, and so it entered into force. And a year later, it was COP1. And in COP1, they said, we got to get our act together. We got to do something. They set out all the procedures and prepared for COP2 and COP3. And it was at COP3 that the Kyoto Protocol came into effect. They had real quantitative reductions that the developed countries had to agree to. And they actually accomplished it. Canada withdrew because they discovered they could finally make money off their tar sands. And but every country managed to do their quota that they were asked to do, and so success. You know, we're off and running. After that, it was COP every year. Every year there was a conference of the parties, and the question is, what happened? Well, you know, it was the same thing when it got to the point of as the Kyoto Protocol was winding down. We ended up with the Paris Climate Agreement, which came out right after the IPCC pointed out that any temperature rise for the whole world of more than 2 degrees Celsius would be disastrous. And so the governments all agreed at the next COP to set it no more than 2 degrees. Developing countries in the ocean island nations all said, no, we're sunk, you know, we are sunk if we do that. So then we use diplomatic language and say, and make every attempt to stay below 1.5 degrees. And that's where the magic 1.5 degrees comes from. But it really appeared first in 2 sequential IPCC reports with justification. That all looks pretty good. And so it's gone. The problem has been when these agreements are brought back to governments, most of them are ratified, and there are enough ratifiers to make it happen. In other words, to have it be in force. But then the individual countries don't do what they said they're going to do. So the diplomacy failure is domestic, right? The policy failure is domestic. It's not in the international part. It seems strange that the same government that sends international people out to negotiate these things can't pull it together when they get back home. And that's where the problem is. And it really boils down to the power of several corporate sectors, the oil and gas industry, coal industry to a lesser extent, it was dying. Coal has been dying for the last 40 years anyway. So this is just a little push to push it down further. But the oil and gas industry really pushed back hard, and a number of other industries did as well. And as one cynical science colleague of mine said, it appears we have the best government money can buy. Sadly, that's a cynical but all too true comment. Where does the money come from? And what is it paid for? Oh, we don't pay bribes. We just pay for people's running for office. Just that process. That's all. It's all. And I can remember a certain president of the Senate, who, when confronted with this, said, "Oh, I don't do things for people who give me money. All that does is buy them access." What? You mean nobody else gets access unless they give you money for your campaign? I mean, it was a pretty telling and dismal commentary on our Congress if the president of the Senate would say something like that. So what do we need to change? We clearly need to change things at the domestic level, the domestic political level. My guess is that probably fewer than 24 members of Congress really understand anything about climate change or care anything about it. They work hard, they're terrific, but I think many of them, of the members, it's the furthest thing from their mind. They have no interest in it whatsoever. They see it as being a threat to the industry that's in their district, and they with a little leverage, they vote for things like the green funding that was done in the Biden administration, which was quite spectacular. And then it all gets undone when Trump comes into office. So you're just seeing it in real time. It's very sad to see the success of the diplomacy be the failure of implementation.
Professor Jones, I have a similar question for you in the sense that in trade negotiation, at least today, previous iterations of diplomacy, whether it's summit diplomacy, shuttle diplomacy, whatever we want to call it, multilateral organization-based diplomacy, they are faltering. Your survey of international trade diplomacy retells the history of what is now effectively the nullification of the WTO's system of reverse consensus. One of, in my opinion, the more innovative dispute settlement mechanisms in international negotiations. So my question to you is the same. Are these modes of diplomacy outdated in international trade?
Well, just to summarize briefly my piece, which originally in 1992 focused on the use of anti-dumping and other trade laws in trade policy, and with, in particular, the link that they had with the negotiation of voluntary export restraints, which were actually kind of cartel-like agreements among exporters and then the importing countries to restrict trade. So economists never cheered for those sorts of agreements. And one thing that we were looking forward to as economists and many other governments was the advent of the WTO, which introduced a dispute settlement system, which you're referring to, and its policy of reverse unanimity on the issue of implementation. So what happens is the panel reviews a case, and then based the panel, you can appeal it to the appellate court, which is not functional these days because of American intransigence on the issues. But if no one unless you had a unanimous objection to a panel report, it was implemented. Now, in a general broader sense, what I did was take that forward now into the WTO and the hope that that sort of legalized system where this was actually, formalized panels, and that this would give a much more kind of disciplined legal review of disputes, and then having a system which would say kind of issue verdicts in cases. This country has made a mistake in its trade relations with this other country, and that original country that violated then had to rescind that policy. And in most cases, that would work. most of the negotiations took place before the decision was made, and a lot of this stuff was done out of court. But let me bring you up to date now. What we have since the WTO are a couple of disturbing problems. One of them was the Americans increasing dissatisfaction with the system. They were the ones, for example, the Americans objected this was under President Obama, to a particular judge in the dispute settlement system because she was, where was she from? Japan, I think, or it was an Asian country, I'm sure.
South Korea, I think. or
South Korea.
One or the other, yeah.
Right, and so he blocked he used his leverage as the American, the leading country in the WTO, to block her approval as a judge or a renewal of her position as a judge. Now, this predated Trump, but that problem has never really been resolved because the appellate body continues to be dormant or, let's say, not functioning since the United States opposed it. And it was not going to get reapproved by President Trump. So what we have now is an answer to your question. I don't think those systems are outdated or in themselves problematical. Here's the problem I've seen with the WTO and how it has developed, is that the United States championed the foundation of the WTO. The WTO is based on a set of rules: most favored nation status, tariff binding, dispute settlement under this system that was described. And that all depended on everyone trusting in the rules and agreeing that if we all follow the rules, we'll all be better off. We can settle disputes without having trade wars. We can have then increased trade liberalization, and everyone has the confidence now that there's a system to review that systematically, and if there are any disputes, that they would be settled peacefully. Now, what happens when the founder of basically the main founder of the WTO, the United States, decides in 2018 to essentially flush the rules down the toilet, pardon my expression, by saying, we're going to enforce the rules the way we see them to be enforced in such issues as national security, and then this trade war. Remember that the WTO came out of the GATT system founded in 1947 in the wake of the Great Depression, the World War II, with the idea in mind that, say, those trade wars that we had, especially the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, that was a bad thing. The world suffered from it. Trade went down by 2/3 in the world. We don't want to have that anymore, so let's have a set of rules. That worked well for the following 60 years. And then all of a sudden, the United States says, we don't believe in globalization. We don't believe in a system where the United States is subordinate to any set of rules. So the system, so in answer to your question, the multilateral mechanisms of not only the WTO, but many other international organizations, and I see this in the environment too, is only as good or as effective as the ability of the countries to agree to basic principles of the rules. What is fair, what is, when the countries make an agreement and there's some sort of multilateral decision made on it or consensus that everybody follows and everyone feels they'll be better off if everyone follows the rules. That is what I see as the great tragedy of today, because that ethos has disappeared. Now, if we have chance later on, we can talk about what might correct that or how that might be resurrected in some way, but that's the way it is right now.
So I want to stick with this idea of, I want to stick with our focus on international trade as I turn to Professor Reed, with the idea of the WTO emerging as an organization meant to reduce harm or to make sure that we're all better off. And those of you who know me know I'm from Pittsburgh, and as a Pittsburgh native, Professor Reed's discussion of steel tariffs really resonated with me. So your holistic review of injury in your article under our tariff laws 45 years ago, that really stuck out. You identify a definition of injury as overvaluing the welfare of industry, that being steel industry, and undervaluing the welfare of consumers. So, Professor Reed, you approach tariffs in your updated piece differently, analyzing the actions taken under Section 232 and their subsequent challenges through a more legal lens. So my question for you is, do you approach tariffs in 2025 as a question of law and jurisprudence, or as a question of political or economic welfare?
Thank you. Let me put your question in perspective by following on to what Kent just said, and Kent referring to the anti-dumping laws. I actually think that my 1978 article, it didn't suggest that the interests of the industry were overvalued, rather that under the anti-dumping procedures, the decisions drew an appropriate balance between protection of the industry and avoiding market disruption compared with the benefits to consumers of lower prices. But then we fast forward to the Trump administration, and my recent article, it focused on litigation that grew out of the first Trump administration's tariffs, specifically on steel, which abandoned, as Ken said, the WTO framework. It went far beyond the anti-dumping laws and relied on a different statute that allows the president to restrict imports if imports threaten the national security. Now, a major difference from a legal perspective, anti-dumping law is based on an investigation by independent agencies subject to fairly strict judicial review to determine whether internationally agreed standards have been met before trade restrictions can be imposed. For national security, this is a statute that in the United States delegates very broad and almost unlimited authority to the president. So the result, as importers challenged the President Trump's 25% tariffs in 2018 on steel imports, the results were that the challenges by importers were unsuccessful because the courts gave significant deference to the president's determinations. They essentially took a role of judicial restraint. So first issue, well, the Constitution supposedly gives Congress the power to impose tariffs and regulate international trade. How can the president do it? Because there are statutes that have specifically delegated that authority. And so the first step was the courts had to confirm, and they did, that these statutes were not a wholesale delegation of legislative authority, but had enough of a intelligible principle so that it was not a complete giveaway of authority. Then the next question was, well, was the president acting within the delegated statutory authority? And the courts took again a approach of judicial restraint. The issue is whether the president clearly misconstrued his authority or acted outside the delegated authority, but with the understanding that the statute needed to be interpreted in such a way that gives the president broader rather than narrower discretion and flexibility to allow the president to manage the problem of national security successfully. And then the third question, well, the president determined, based on a report by the Commerce Department, that yes, steel imports were a threat to national security, but that have any realistic basis in fact. And here the courts exercise even more judicial restraint than elsewhere, and ruled that the president's the reasoning, the exercise of discretion, the exercise of judgment, the determination of the underlying facts, they are not subject to judicial review. And so the result is that the courts can very rarely curb presidential action under these discretion-oriented statutes. Now, let me come back to the other point that Kent made earlier. Writing this was extremely difficult because things changed from day to day during the beginning of the Trump administration. And I can also agree with what Kent said, that as of today, part of what I wrote is probably obsolete. And it was done months ago. And that's because the president's tariffs of April 2nd, the Liberation Day tariffs, those are already subject to judicial challenges. There's a case in the Court of International Trade that was commenced in mid-April. The court heard oral argument for nearly 2 hours on Tuesday of this week. And I listened to it, and I think the president may well have misconstrued his authority and taken action outside his delegated authority. But so we'll have to see what happens in those cases. And so I think the short answer to your question is, yes, I shifted from my 1978 focus, which was more on the policies of trade and tariffs, to the legal side and the role of courts in whether they can, in reviewing and evaluating the legality of the president's actions.
So, in the interest of encouraging some audience participation, I think we're actually going to now open it up for questions to all three of our authors. There are microphones stationed at the center of each aisle. And so I would invite our audience members to, if they would be so inclined. I can already see Professor Hendrickson. And I will, although I do not expect anyone to follow my guidance, I will simply say that even if this is the Fletcher School of Law of long preambles and double questions, for the sake of our panelists, try to keep it short, but thank you. Anyway, Professor Hendrickson, please.
Thank you very much. This has been a very, not only reflective, but very suggestive and stimulating discussion. What it brings to mind for me is the theory of hegemonic stability, which maybe 20 years ago, Bob Cohane and others wrote about. And the question raised even then was the following. Yes, Britain can create a regime, so to speak, of freedom of the seas in the 19th century. The United States could create the GATT and then the World Trade Organization. It could be involved in creating climate regimes, negotiated but did not sign the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, but that was a regime that the US had a lot to do with, Elliot Richardson. But the question was, can a regime survive? Can that structure survive if the hegemon lapses or falls out? I mean, in a sense, a regime is a public good. And what occurs to me is the following. Bill Moomaw mentioned that domestic implementation has been the problem, domestic politics. A public good has to be supported by the public. Diplomacy, Fletcher invented, so to speak, at least the term public diplomacy. And I think we have failed at Fletcher in engendering on the part of the general public an understanding of diplomacy and what these commitments mean, backed up by law, as well as the self-interest of consumers, as well as companies. So we really have a lot of work to do in creating a sense of what diplomacy is among our general population.
Maybe I can just briefly add to Professor Hendrickson's points, which I heartily agree with. It would be sufficient for me if the American public would understand what Article 2 of the Constitution says, which is that Congress is in control of tariffs and taxes. Now, Congress has delegated powers to the president, and they, as I understand it, are being challenged in the Court of International Trade case that President Trump has gone beyond the Emergency Economic Act which is he's using as an excuse to raise tariffs unilaterally. Okay, the Constitution and our founding fathers never intended for one single person to be in charge of tariffs, who could change the tariffs at will on his whim without any consultation from an admittedly supine Congress because of the politics within the Republican Party. But this has been a tragedy for American politics, that many people still believe that foreigners pay tariffs, that Americans don't pay the tariffs, foreigners pay the tariffs, and we should rejoice in all the extra money we're getting through a Department of External Revenue, which the president set up as part of his plan to keep the wool pulled over people's eyes. So I'm getting off here now, but I'm retired and I can speak.
Audience member.
Bill, my question was for you. I remember one of your papers called The Mutual Gains Approach to Climate Change, where you looked at kind of how do we help people meet their energy needs. And I just wonder, I remember sharing that paper with several folks in the industry, and they actually really liked it, and they felt like that was a very productive framing. And I wonder, what you think about, had that shifting of the lens been more widely accepted and pursued, would we be in the same place?
Stephanie, thank you. That's really a good question. I was introduced to the mutual gains approach by none other than Larry Susskind from MIT, who's one of the people who really refined getting to yes, I guess, was the origin of that idea, which is that when you're negotiating, you not only need to understand what your own goals are, what is your position and what is your interest, but what is the position and interest of all the other parties? And how do you help them meet as many of their interests while you're meeting your own interests? There's been very little of that. It's been a win-lose kind of thing. How many times have you heard, well, why should the United States do anything if China isn't doing anything? China is emitting twice as much every year as the United States is now, but the accumulated carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from the United States is double that of China, because we've been doing it a long time at a high level. China is doing an enormous amount. China produces more solar panels than the rest of the world combined and installs them in China and sells the rest to the rest of the world. Chinese electric vehicles appear to be far better now than almost anything that's coming out of Europe or North America, and much less expensive. China actually has an EV charging network because with their central control, they can do that. We sort of leave it to the marketplace, and the marketplace does not do mutual gains. They do selfish gains. So I think we really need to train our negotiators better. One of the things I learned while actually working with Larry on the preparation for the Kyoto Protocol, or the COP that produced the Kyoto Protocol, Larry came up with this idea that we should have an informal prior meeting of some of the people who will be negotiating, who are there not in their official capacity, but in their individual capacity. And let's do it in a nice place. So we did it in a nice place in the Rhine Valley in Germany called Schlangenbad, which means snake bath. Because these warm waters, what the Romans discovered when they got there, that there were these warm waters, that even in the middle of the winter, the snakes were out sort of in that warm spot. And it's become a spa and quite a nice place. And we had one of the US negotiators there. We had the person who was going to chair the whole process there. We had people from the EU, we had people from developing countries, and spent a week nice meals, pleasant evenings, getting to know each other. And at the end of it, we had a concept worked out. The negotiations went very close to that conceptual thing that was worked out that way, because it was all based on mutual gains. What is it that developing countries need? What is it that's special in developing countries? India, China. What is it that the Europeans and the North Americans need? And tried to frame the Kyoto Protocol so it would meet a combination of those goals. So yes, I think it would make a big difference. By the way, when you were talking earlier about hegemonic this and that and the other thing, it seemed to me we were seeing a great example of hegemonic stupidity.
And I will turn it to our audience member on the left for, unfortunately, our last question.
Thank you. Really quickly, just really a comment. My name is Annalie Babb Fletcher, 94 Fletcher, 2003. I am from Barbados, and I just had a quick question. Is this session being recorded, or has it been recorded? It is. And do you share that you're sharing them online and so on? Because I just want to back up what Professor Henriksen has said. I'm sitting there listening to this excellent panel, and I'm thinking my Prime Minister is Mia Mottley, and she's doing a tremendous amount trying to rally the world around the issues related to climate change, new climate finance, and all of this. And this history is just excellent, but also relates to what the world is dealing with now. And I think Fletcher has an opportunity to really globally take a stand and educate the world and other people, the public, really on what these issues are. So I'm hoping that this will be used. Do you have plans? Do you have a? I think certainly for Barbados and the Caribbean, I was doing my best just to record from where I was sitting, so I got the tops of people's heads. I was trying to capture it, and I'm going to share it with her. But I think that snippets of this ought to be shared globally, and to start or restart a process of educating people about why negotiation, why mutual interest and all these things are so important. That was my, not quite a question, but a comment. Thank you.
And I think a wonderful comment to end on. So on behalf of the Fletcher Forum and on behalf of everyone who's come together to plan this event, thank you for joining us. I invite everyone to come up, grab a copy of the journal. They are here. It's wonderful information to share. So that's it. Thank you so much for coming.